The vast majority of the projects that we've talked about today are not actually traditional company structures as we've known them, and they're instead decentralized organizations. So this panel is going to be about what does that actually mean, and how are these projects governed? And by governance, what we really mean is how are decisions made, and also what are the rights of all of the participants in these organizations. And for this panel, we've got two what I would call benevolent dictators of projects, and you guys can kind of address whether you think that's accurate or not. And then we've got two analysts who have done a lot of work both thinking and writing about different governance structures. So why don't we start, Zuko, with you and kind of talk about the Zcash project and how it's structured from a governance perspective.
Okay. Briefly, for those who don't know, Zcash is a cryptocurrency, and for those who do know, you might have heard that it's a more private variant of Bitcoin. But instead, I say that it's internet money, and privacy is just the first feature that, or one of the features that you need for internet money for everyone in the world. And the way it's structured is like this. For the most, so there's sort of concentric circles that I would draw on a chalkboard. The biggest part of the Zcash project and community is an open source project with a GitHub repo and a bunch of hackers chattering at each other on a chat channel, and a bunch of miners and full nodes running a network that connects to each other using the open source. It's all like that. And then within that larger ecosystem, there are at least two smaller organizations. One is the Zcash company, of which I'm the CEO. And the other is the Zcash Foundation, which is a nonprofit that I don't have any control over, staffed by people that I can't fire.
And so who makes decisions about the Zcash protocol?
That's a good question. And I mean, I definitely make decisions about the Zcash protocol for now, but the question is, that I think is an interesting question, is when could that, under what circumstances could that change? You know? So the current situation is that the company, the Zcash company, acts like we expect everyone to do what we do, we expect everyone to follow us, and so far they follow us, right? So part of that is just social. You know, if we looked more indecisive, they would probably not follow us as closely. But at the sort of actual enforcement level, we have almost no control, like legally or in terms of the protocol or cryptographically or in any way else, over all the users of the protocol, any more than like the Bitcoin core devs have over the users of Bitcoin. There's this very important thing about software development and social organization, but there's almost no legal control except for the name. The Zcash company has a trademark on the word Zcash when used to represent used in digital currency or some field of endeavor. And so we do have the legal ability to force people to stop using the name if they're using it in a way that's confusing to users.
Which is interesting because I think we've seen in Bitcoin an issue around that, right?
Well, I don't know if we have yet, but I expect that we will. Yeah. Like, because in Bitcoin there is no trademark. No one can legally force anyone else not to use the name Bitcoin. And there are currently multiple factions who think that they have the right to use it in a way that means something different from the other factions. So that might become ambiguous what people mean by Bitcoin eventually. Oh, one more fact. We're in the process of signing that trademark over to the Zcash Foundation, actually, because that's the kind of thing that is more appropriate for a nonprofit operating in the public interest than for a for-profit.
And what's this, just quickly, the structure of the foundation?
It's a newly born nonprofit. They're applying for 501c3 status as a public education and science and public infrastructure and financial inclusion organization. They have 5 directors that are volunteers who are all really, really trusted, credible people within the community that are really strong-willed, and I can't push them around. But one more thing. The nonprofit has so far, or the foundation has so far stated that they intend to let the company keep leading. Like they say, our role is to serve as a hub of decision-making and coordination in the larger ecosystem, which will probably be more necessary as the ecosystem grows bigger. But they said when they formed, so far the company seems to be doing fine, so we'll let them keep doing it.
Got it. And Julian, switching to Gollum, why don't you describe kind of the governance structure of the Gollum project?
Yes, sure. So just for those of you who don't know, Gollum is a piece of technology basically we are creating at the moment, still not in a production, that will allow users to share for remuneration computing power of computers. So you will be able to put your computer on the market and let other users use it, or use other computers, other users' computers, paying them for that. As for the governance structure, we are structured as a company, basically responsible for delivering this technology and later on developing that. We don't have any NGO body within the project, which is a result of calculation we had like very early in the project when we decided to crowdfund that sustainable project at that level should have a business model of its own, like exceeding the burning the funds you have from crowdfunding. So basically, I believe we have a sustainable business model which will comply with all the assumptions of the centralized network we want to build in the long term. And actually, I think this is good, because if you think about like very low-level things, like for example Ethereum, we are building on probably Bitcoin as well, like many other things. You can have a hope that this will sustain even without a strong business model of like entity or entities behind that, because it is so level. So many different organizations are using that and building on that they will be interested in pushing forward the technology, even if the initial source of funding dries out. And I think that can work perfectly. Like I believe that, for example, Linux is example of this kind of approach. Like everybody needs Linux, so big corporations are happy to fund the development of the system. With something which is like medium level, I would say, we are still not really a consumer product. Ultimately, we kind of are, but not in every regard. I think we already need this sustainability, which will exceed the crowdfunding money, because like at the moment it might look like a lot, but if you look at the budgets of companies, like the spending on R&D of the established internet companies, this is like really nothing. And I think this model is more and more true the higher you go. So if you're just creating an app on a smartphone that will have like some cool capabilities, like the ones we have seen today, then of course you have to make it sustainable. And the question, of course, the best question then is like how that comply with the full crowdfunding model.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So Daniel and Linda, What are the big differences that you guys see between traditional like company structures and and these new decentralized organization structures?
So should I start? So very quickly also, I'm co-founder of Co-Founded, so which is a platform really made to develop the crowd sale process. So we're connecting crowd sale supporters, the best projects, and experts in different professional domains together. And we're launching with our own crowd sale soon, and also upcoming a number of other ones. So we've been involved with quite a few crowd sales and projects up to this level, or up to this time. And what I would say is, what we see right now in the space as it is today, this is a space built by startups. So an efficient startup in blockchain or outside of blockchain should work like any other startup. And that means very fast execution times. You have high expectations on execution, and that gives way to pretty clear governance models. And I would say that the experiments we see with decentralized organizations, it's very interesting, but it's not a great fit for the very fast-moving projects, and also for the projects like on a more protocol level, where you have a pretty clearly developed roadmap and structure. Then I don't also see why you would experiment with the new governance models at this stage. But coming forward, I think that's more interesting.
Yeah. And Linda, you've written some interesting things about this, kind of highlighting the difference between Litecoin and Bitcoin. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how the different governance models have kind of enabled different approaches.
Yeah, so I know we're at Token Summit, but I think it's important to learn from the lessons of other digital currencies. So I've been paying attention to Litecoin, and it's very technically similar to Bitcoin. Yet one of the biggest differences is that with Litecoin, there's the founder still there, Charlie Lee, and Litecoin wasn't running into a scaling issue, but yet he was pushing forward SegWit, which will allow for larger block sizes and fixed transaction malleability. So I think it was really important that there was like a leader in the space. And it kind of parallels some traditional companies in that sense, because you do have like a CEO and a leader. But what I think is different than just a regular company is that for decentralized governance, you have anyone in the world that can participate. So with traditional companies, you kind of have a silo jurisdiction that people can make these decisions. And then at the same time, it's often very opaque to look at what's going on in a traditional company. Whereas like in any of these DAOs, like if you actually work with something like Aragon, you can see real-time updates and start seeing like the governance model actually play out in real time and see like people's voting. So I think that'll be really interesting and really different than a traditional model.
It's interesting because the way Bitcoin is structured is that no one knows who Satoshi is. There's no founder who the community can rally around on decisions. And there's a lot of Bitcoin people that think that is really the strongest aspect of Bitcoin. There's no central point of failure. But juxtaposed to that is Ethereum and Vitalik, who is this this benevolent dictator that everyone rallies around, and as a result they're able to move really quickly. And Charlie and Litecoin is another example. Zuko, I'm curious your thoughts on the importance of decentralization versus being able to iterate quick. And do you think that in the early days it's important to iterate quick, and over time it's important to get more decentralized, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good guess. I mean that seems like a plausible idea. By the way, I realized I didn't explain the most important fact about Zcash governance, which is funding. When I heard everyone else talking, the Zcash company gets about 1% of all the coins generated by mining over the first 4 years, roughly. And the foundation also gets about the same amount over about the same time. So that's why. That's why they have funding.
So why
I heard-
do you think decentralization? I guess a direct question. Do you think decentralization is really important? Because I mean, Bitcoin maximalists who love Bitcoin and are passionate about it tend to be skeptical of a lot of the token projects that we're seeing because they're not decentralized. My personal view is that decentralization is not binary, and there's different degrees of decentralization that change over time. But I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
That's another good idea you have there. Yeah, I think there's a subtle difference between this kind of decentralization you're talking about and the notion of consensuality, of opt-in, which for me, it seems clear to me that you can have both. People who want the version with no leader can have that. And the people who want a version with a leader can have that. And because I think it's fine for there to be a plethora of experiments and projects at the same time. So I certainly, in organizing Zcash, I certainly thought that we needed clear leadership and relatively well-paced execution, not too rapid and not too tardy, and designed for that. And at the same time, the existence of the foundation is there actually because we did have the same sort of intuition that you had, that in the long run and at the larger scale, that becomes more of a liability.
By the way, did you wear that shirt specifically for this panel?
Well, among the clean shirts in my hotel room. But Vitalik gave me this shirt, which makes me love it all the more.
Why don't you explain? I presume there's some people in this room that don't know the relevance of the Hard Fork Cafe shirt. So, why?
I don't know. I'm one of them. It's just a funny joke because Ethereum had a hard fork, which was a huge controversy about, well, a lot of things, but part of the controversy was about centralized or leaderly decision-making versus consensus decision-making.
So let me pitch in also a little bit, because one aspect that I think is really important is also expectations on governance. So now we're talking about the really high-scale projects, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Litecoin, but now there are more than 130 projects that you saw in this Smith & Crown. So ranging from very big projects to very small ones. And if the governance structures, among many other things, are not very clearly stated out, I think we can see on Reddit and in many different Slacks how much people want to be able to give their guidance, control things, and be part of the governance of this project. So we have seen some things on Reddit, like they post one proposal. Each upvote on this proposal is upvote is a vote to implement this thing. So just trying to make up their own governance models even. And one example with you also, Julian. So very early on, you also asked for public feedback on your white paper. I was one of them who gave public feedback. And that's also a double-edged sword in a way, because when you go out, ask for feedback, and maybe you don't want to implement and have different opinions about the feedback you get. So that's also interesting to hear about.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so first answering your question, I think that really depends on what you are developing. If the project is about trustless consensus protocol, so like Bitcoin or Ethereum or perhaps like some like payment system designed to be just payment systems, then I think you can discuss like what is better. I see like pro and cons of both approaches, and I think this is like a really difficult discussion, because like on the one hand, like exactly maybe the whole hard fork situation and the DAO as it was wouldn't happen in the Ethereum community if it was structured differently. On the other hand, I think that we can discuss if Bitcoin couldn't move a little bit faster with development if it was structured differently. Still, I understand the arguments for like total decentralization and anonymity of Satoshi, and this is of course like a strong point you can discuss it. Then with the like application protocols or dApps tokens, which we are, as I understand, discussing more here, I don't think this is that controversial any longer, because you can keep the technology open and system decentralized in a way that everyone can join that, even perhaps like fork and move into a different direction, and still keep strong leadership, which will enable rapid progress. And then if you look on how the projects are funded at the moment, at least our project, like we were funded by the community. So our obligation is to move the technology forward as fast as we can. I doubt that can be done without a strong leadership, both business-wise and technology-wise. Mm. And as for like getting feedback from the community, I think this is very important, because like if we are community funded, that we need to be like in touch with our community. We had discussion on the conference that was at the beginning of this week about pros and cons of crowdfundings, and of course this space is very diversified at the moment. So you've got like perhaps good project and perhaps not that good projects. And of course some projects I think fail to communicate, which might lead to the conclusion that you just crowdfund yourselves, you've got the money and you see in your basement and do nothing. I don't think that if you want to be responsible, if you want to keep your integrity, this is true. Like you don't have to agree with every feedback you've got with your community, but you at least have state your reasons. If you're doing this and not that, you should at least explain why you believe this is superior.
Got it. So Linda, I know you've thought a lot about new types of governance structures that we might see in the future. Want to share some ideas around governance that you're interested in or excited about?
Yeah, so one thing that I've been following a lot, and this is kind of an older idea originally proposed by Robin Hanson, but it was the idea of futarchy. So for those that don't know about it, it's governments or organizations making decisions based on the outcome of prediction markets. And I think that with Augur and Gnosis, you're going to start seeing more people participate in prediction markets and start seeing really interesting results. And Vitalik wrote a good blog post on this a few years ago that most people might not have like enough information to make like day-to-day decisions about a project, but you could have like a hybrid futarchy scenario where people are voting on prediction markets for who should represent them in the project. So I find that really interesting. Another project I've been following pretty closely is Tezos. And so having on-chain governance, I think will be really interesting, and potentially delegating your vote to someone else to work for decentralized governance.
I think, yeah, and a lot of people have spoken and kind of questioned whether this model might work. And I think it's a great experiment, but the idea of kind of empowering all users to vote and letting that be the decision-making process of the protocol, I think it's really exciting from like an intellectual perspective, but I don't know. How do you guys feel about that type of approach in practice?
So it seems like a very slow process. If you're going to delegate small questions out, so how most democracies work is that you have you're voting on someone to represent you. And that's the most efficient way we can do when you're born into a system. But in order to have a system that works and can execute quickly, I think it really must go up to very, very high level questions in order to have this kind of direct voting to work, and have a very clear distinction between lower level question and what is the major questions for this kind of network or protocol.
Got it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think that there's going to be a lot of tokens in the space. There already is. And frankly, people don't have time to just pay attention to everything going on. So the higher level decisions, the lower level decisions should definitely be made by the team, I think. And then the higher level, if there's some contention, I think that's where the voters might start turning out.
Zuko, do you see a model in the far out future where Zcash would empower users to make decisions?
It's the kind of thing that we like to be the second mover or the nth mover. So I'd like to see some other project experiment with that and see what happens. Which reminds me, Julian was saying, he was describing, contrasting the Bitcoin and the Ethereum governance setups and saying how each is subject to criticism or being blamed for certain things. And I thought at the same time, it's really neat how those two governance structures are so different from one another, and yet they're both very successful. Yeah. And I don't just mean the price. Like, even if you care nothing about the price, in my opinion, as a lifetime technologist and scientist, those are two miracles of technology and of human organization, even though they're organized very, very differently from one another. And that's really hopeful. There's lots of different governance models that can work.
That's a good point. So we've got a few minutes left, and at this point I'd like to open it up for questions. Make sure we're not speaking a different language to you guys, because a lot of these ideas are very different. So, yeah, anyone have any questions?
You're going to have to shout.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question too. So, yeah, go ahead. So how will we allow users to vote? Like, yes, and this kind of relates to, I think, what we were talking about. So, yeah.
That's something that I really like about this space, is that everything that we're talking about, it has a lot of importance and real-world impact, but no one is forced to do anything against their will. And so it's as if everyone voted for president, except if you didn't like it, you could instantly teleport to a different continent with the people that voted your way, if you want it. So I really appreciate that outlet.
Yeah, and that's one thing also, sorry, but to add, and I think a kind of safety net that I think all that are building at least a protocol, but also maybe most of the dApps in this space, like a safety valve would be that whatever network you've built, and all the value created in these networks are in the tokens and the networks. So if also a large majority would not like a major decision, that you would be able to move out this network and restart the project somewhere else and still have the same value saved, but with another governing body.
When you teleport, your value comes with the value you own comes with you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to add that Augur, Joey from Augur has talked about this too. So if there's a prediction market outcome that people don't agree upon, then Augur itself can fork, but that doesn't affect Ethereum. So you can have two worlds where people really just don't agree with each other.
Got it. We've got time for at least one more question. Yeah, in the middle. So let me just repeat the question. So the question is, how are the directors of the Zcash Foundation financially incentivized?
Well, he actually asked more specifically, do they have equity in the company? Do they have coins, this and that?
Well, you don't need to go into specifics.
I'm not going to answer those specifics, although there's a lot of transparency, and some of that you can find publicly on the web already. And I don't know, once the foundation is just constituting itself, they will probably have their own rules about such disclosure once they have rules. None of them, but it's important to me that none of them are under my personal control. I can't fire any of them. I can't defund or fuck with them.
We've got time for one more question, if anyone has one. So that, just for the video, we want to repeat the question. So why did you set these, basically why did you set these two different organizations up in the first place?
That's a good question, because so far there's not really a need for two. And it really goes back to what Nick suggested earlier that there's an intuition that when you're a small organization and a small community, speed of execution and coherency is more important. And once you reach a certain size, a certain diversity of stakeholders, then it becomes more and more important to have communication and coordination around diverse views and predictability and deliberation and stuff like that. Also, my company is a for-profit, so we could conceivably be distracted. We just announced our first commercial deal with a big bank the other day. We could conceivably start making enough money from for-profit things that we got distracted from supporting the open protocol, whereas the foundation doesn't have that risk.
Awesome. So we're out of time. Thanks very much, guys.